We're going to move on into Peter Ross's book. The last time Peter and I saw each other was in West Penwith. It was kind of a classically miserly Cornish day, which is kind of the best weather to see things. I think at the time it was maybe like, oh, maybe it's a bit wet and damp and not so glorious, but that's often the way Cornwall is. It's sort of sold by GWR and other people as being this sunny, sort of like foreign holiday almost in Britain, but actually it's usually just incredibly damp, and also the roads are really shit. It doesn't matter whether it's the A30 or the tiny little lanes. It's very difficult to get around. But Peter did get around, and it became part of Upon a White Horse, the book that Peter's going to tell you about. It's a book of the month. It's a tremendous book. It's a great travel odyssey around Britain, I suppose. But you're going to hear more about it from Peter. So I'm going to put my glasses on. I'm going to seamlessly get the thing up on the screen that you want to look at, and then Peter Ross, everybody. Peter Ross.
Hello everyone, thanks for coming along, thanks for sticking around. It's quite warm, isn't it? My book, Upon the White Horse, is about wonder and wondering. It considers what these ancient sites may have meant to the people who created them. It explores why they've continued to be important sort of culturally in the centuries that have passed since their own time, but most significantly, it looks at what they mean to people now. So the book is full of stories. It's full of the stories of the people who I met and spoke with along the way, from Cornwall to Shetland. My own story is just part of the book, and I've chosen not to frame it as a personal journey. So the most personal material, it only comes in about halfway through. I think I won't go into that in detail this evening. I think it's probably better sort of read than said. But I would like to begin by offering something of my story and my family's story as context for what follows. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. This is me sitting on top of a portal stone that once formed part of the entrance to a tomb. The photograph was taken, I believe, sometime in the summer of 1984. Sorry, I'm in your way there. Okay. Sometime in the summer of 1984. So I'm 10 years old there, coming up on 11. And I imagine that many people in this room, given that it's Stone Club, probably have similar sorts of photographs of themselves as kids at ancient sites. Would that be right? Yes. Okay. So, taken there probably by people you loved. Maybe you were a bit bored and cold at the time, but now that you're older and have maybe been kind of knocked about by life a little bit, and the people who took you to these places have perhaps passed on, there's something about pictures like this that I think feels meaningful. My mother gave me this photograph when I turned 50, I can hardly believe it either. Thanks for the sympathetic laughter. Along with many other pictures from my childhood. I've got no recollection at all of this being taken, and it's only in the last few months, while making the finishing touches to my book, that I was able to identify where it is and what it is. Now, I now know that it was taken on the island of Islay, the southernmost of the Inner Hebrides, and that it is a Neolithic chambered cairn called Cragabus, thought to have been built around 3500 BC. Excavation in 1902 found human remains and fragments of clay beakers, which suggests that it was reused as a tomb in the Bronze Age. And it's a significant coincidence for me that beakers were found in this tomb, because that same summer of 1984, probably only weeks after this picture was taken, my grandparents and I actually excavated a Bronze Age burial of our own. And I think it was that discovery that led ultimately to the writing of Upon a White Horse. Here are my grandparents, Eric and Susan Ross, on the day of their wedding in 1946, just a few days before Christmas, I think. You can see that my granddad is in his RAF uniform. He was a bus builder by trade. That was what he did. That was his job. He worked on a production line building buses. But during the Second World War, he had trained and served as a flight mechanic. He joined in 1941 when he was 20 years old and was posted to North Africa. And it was there that he fell in love with archaeology. He and the unit that he was part of had the job of taking the wings on and off of a type of reconnaissance plane called an Oster, which could take off from any flat bit of land and go and survey enemy positions. So after months of doing this work in the desert, they were filthy. And when it came time for the Allied victory parade through Tunis, my granddad and the other men were told that they should go and have a much needed wash before marching past the top brass. I think General Eisenhower was there, many others. But the place where they were told to do this was the ruins of a Roman bathhouse in which the hot spring was still working. And apparently it was that experience, washing the dirt of warfare from his body, in the same building where no doubt Roman soldiers had washed theirs, that awoke in him a deep interest in the ancient past. So back in Scotland after the war, he took night classes in archaeology, learning how to excavate properly. And he passed that knowledge on to his wife, my gran, Susan, and they in turn taught it to me. But I mean, to an extent, I guess, because I was only a little boy, I suspect I was probably given a trial where I could do the least harm. But we did used to travel around and excavate together. They were amateur archaeologists, volunteers on excavations, mostly on Roman forts associated with the Antonine Wall in central Scotland, and they would sometimes take me along with them to help. Now, one evening, after my granddad had finished his shift, he went to the pub near the flat where they lived, and standing at the bar, drinking whiskey with trembling hands, there was a quarryman from a nearby sand quarry in a place called Blair Drummond. The man had been working the excavator, and the bucket had dug into the quarry bank, and all these bones had come tumbling out. So he was really shaken up and had gone to the pub to steady his nerves. He told my granddad what happened, and my granddad, who through his kind of experience understood what this might be, came rushing back to the flat and got my gran and me, and we drove over to the spot. And there, right enough, was the quarry bank with some long flat stones jutting out of it, and on the ground below the bank, bits of skull, long bones, and several fragments of decorated clay beaker. The beaker had probably been intact until the excavator had broken into the grave, and it would have looked a bit like one of these that were found in Avebury in Wiltshire, a bit like that. My grandparents and I gathered up what we could find and went home. And my granddad called the local council archaeologist, a woman called Lorna Main, and led by her, we excavated the site. So it was a kist burial, essentially a stone box with a body in it. And analysis done at the University of Glasgow later on indicated that that individual was about 18 years old. But what I remember really clearly is holding in my palm a single tooth. It was a molar, and being told that it was 4,500 years old. I've never forgotten that. The contrast between my sort of soft young hand and the dry ancient tooth was so great, but there was also a tremendous intimacy in it, and a sense of time collapsing together. And I think that Upon a White Horse, and then in fact the whole thrust of all my writing, which is deeply concerned with the relationship between people and place, and the past and the present, probably comes from that moment of holding that tooth. Now the story has a postscript, which is that when I began writing the book, I decided that it'd be good to try and locate and see the artifacts from that burial. But that proved to be very difficult. All of the bones are utterly lost, which I feel quite bad about. And the beaker had got mislaid in the system. It had never properly been catalogued and stored, I guess because it was fragmentary. You know, if it had been intact like one of those, it would have been on display. But because I started to look into things, the beaker was tracked down, and I was invited to go and see it at the National Museum of Scotland. So I was taken behind the scenes, shown into an office, and there on the table was what we had found in 1984. And it was incredible because although I was emotionally prepared to see the beaker, what I hadn't expected was that 40 years later its fragments were still being held by my granddad's old Tupperware lunchbox where we had gathered them up in the first place. You know, I remember kind of home baking and sandwiches being brought out of that thing on our many trips. And while it's the beaker that's sort of historically, culturally significant, it's the lunchbox, you know, that is my relic, my past. I don't know why I didn't become an archaeologist. Everything in my early life seemed to point towards that. Instead, I became a journalist, and latterly I write books. So archaeology, for me, has always felt like a path not taken, and the book is an attempt to walk it a little. Now, Upon a White Horse takes its name from the old nursery rhyme about Banbury Cross, but the more significant reference is to the Uffington White Horse in Oxfordshire. I visited the horse in July 2023 on a weekend when lots of volunteers had gathered to weed it. The National Trust still calls this by its traditional name, scouring, because if they called it weeding, apparently no one would show up. It's done once a year, and then a month later, a new, very thin layer of chalk is hammered into the surface. They need a lot of volunteers because the hill figure is very big. It's 374 feet from head to tail. It's also very old. The horse has been dated using a technique called optically stimulated luminescence, which to me just seems like a form of sorcery. I mean, I imagine there's archaeologists in the room. Forgive me if I've got any of this wrong, but I think what happens is, in this case, they took samples of chalk from the deepest and therefore the oldest part of the horse's belly, and then analysed that chalk in the laboratory to establish when they had last seen daylight. And this gave a range of 1,380 to 550 BC. I'm never sure which way round that goes, 550, 1,380, but anyway, we can say that it's about 3,000 years old. And that makes it the only one of England's chalk horses that is actually prehistoric. And it's the only one that might not be a horse. It's been suggested that it could be a dog, a dragon, whatever it is. I think it has a remarkable sense of energy and grace. You know, it appears to be galloping, even flying across that hillside. It looks to me like a constellation fallen from the sky. I mean, I take it that everyone here knows what the Uffington horse looks like, right? Okay. Which is just as well because I don't have any good photographs of it. And the reason for that is it's impossible to photograph in its entirety except for from the air. It lies on such a considerable slope, so when you're standing by the head, you can't see much of the rest of the body, and when you're approaching directly from below, you can't see the head. Unless you've got a drone, or you're a bird, or one of those aliens that were recently mentioned, you can't see the horse at all at once. And what you see instead are little abstract bits and pieces like this. I spent one evening when I was there travelling around the countryside, trying to get a good viewpoint, and eventually found myself 6 miles out, climbing over a churchyard wall, ripping my trousers on some brambles, and looking at the figure through binoculars, which is a bit of a faff, frankly. And of course, back when it was made, they didn't have binoculars. So the Uffington White Horse is this curious phenomenon. It's a highly visible landmark that's hard to see. I love the way it looks. I love its mystery and its elusive quality. But what I find mind-blowing about it is that if it was left alone, if all the weeding and re-chalking stopped, then it's thought that it would disappear within 20 to 25 years. It would just grass over. And the archaeology, as I understand it, seems to show that that hasn't happened. So if we think about all the things that have occurred during the lifetime of the horse, the coming of Christianity, the Roman occupation, the rise of Wessex and the other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, Viking attacks, the Norman conquest, the agricultural revolution, wars, any one of those things could have resulted in the destruction of the horse. And the fact that it survived can only be because local people over a long period of time have considered it meaningful, despite their different beliefs, values, and understandings of the world. That's what makes it a good title and emblem for my book, I think. It illustrates the way, and you must all feel this, it illustrates the way in which the ancient past continues to make itself felt as a presence in the present. Like a heartbeat or hoofbeats, it's a sort of pulse beneath the present day. I found Avebury in Wiltshire a good place to think about why the ancient past seems to have become so significant for us now. I went there because I was fascinated by the idea of this little chocolate box village being within and around this gigantic stone circle and prehistoric complex. And I wondered what it must be like to live there, how the spiritually minded incomers rub along with the more traditional and settled community and with the huge number of tourists. And I think this photograph of what is surely England's greatest postbox topper illustrates the mix reasonably well. Although I understand there's a good one in Cornwall with Lanyon quoit on it, so I need to see a picture of that very soon. I first visited Avebury the day after I'd been to Stonehenge for the winter solstice, and it was a really enjoyable contrast with the extremely busy and noisy gathering, because I got to Avebury very early in the morning, in the depths of winter, and I almost had the whole site to myself. I'd seen lots of photographs, of course, but I don't think anything prepares you for the physical reality of being among the stones. They're massive, and each one's different, and you find as you walk around, or I find anyway, that you perceive meaningful shapes in them. One of them looks like a crown, another looks like a heart or the head of a cat, or a figure in a shroud, I think, like this one here, or even a smiling face. This is Avebury's friendliest stone, and this is the friendliest sheep. Is it friendly or merely curious? But you can decide. I mean, I don't mean that the stones were shaped to look like any of those things. It's just the same sort of reflex of the mind that causes us to see animals in clouds. So Avebury is a place where I think you often feel that same kind of imaginative wonder that's perhaps more familiar from childhood. But I think the real impact of Avebury is cumulative, at least it is for me. Stone after stone after stone after stone, and you get these wonderful juxtapositions all the time between the site and the stuff of modern life. This is the Swindon stone, which is so huge and so close to the road that you have the sort of pleasant impression that were you on the 49 bus, you could just lean out and slap it on the way to Devizes. What I feel when walking around Avebury is a strange mingling of scarcity and abundance, right? There are so many stones, but there's also an obvious absence. Aubrey Burrell, in his 1979 book Prehistoric Avebury, tells us that there would have been over 600 stones when the megalithic complex was at its height, and that there are now 76. There were two periods of stone felling. First of all, during the Middle Ages, a number of stones were pulled down and buried in pits, possibly because they were seen as ungodly, or maybe they were just in the way of farming or building. And then in later centuries, certainly the 17th and 18th, a great many stones were brought down and broken up for use in farm works and for housing. By the early years of the 20th century, there were only 15 stones remaining in the henge and 6 altogether in the avenues. However, in the 5 years between 1934 and 39, Alexander Keeler, using the money from his family's Marmalade empire, located and re-erected many of the stones that had been buried during the Middle Ages. But the Second World War broke out before he could complete his work, all of which means that there are at least 18 stones still buried in known locations, and I understand there are certainly more that could be found, plus a further 5 stones are lying on the ground, flat, where they fell. And that, to me, begs a question: should those remaining stones be excavated and re-erected, as Keeler would have done if time and money had allowed? Given the kind of strong legal protections and layers of bureaucracy that govern any kind of intervention at prehistoric structures, much less a sort of iconic World Heritage Site like Avebury, it seems highly unlikely that will ever happen. But I must admit that the idea appeals to me very much. Imagine if every year for the next 20 or so years, a new stone was brought up out of the darkness where it has lain for centuries and set up on the land in the light again. I know this isn't very scientific language, but wouldn't that be cool? Stone circles, of course, are not just things of the past. People do still make them, and they are still meaningful. These are the Sighthill stones, Glasgow's only stone circle. Has anyone been to the Sighthill stones? Is that 2 people? Great. It was designed and built for the Sighthill housing estate as part of the Callaghan government's job creation scheme. Socialism in action there. There are some amazing photographs from 1979 of the stones being lowered into place by these military helicopters. It was called Operation Megalithic Lift. And it was kind of Spinal Tap meets Apocalypse Now. One great thing about the Sighthill stones is that they were designed and positioned by a man called Duncan Lunan, a science and sci-fi writer, and his friend John Braithwaite, a maker of telescopes. So they would be astronomically aligned. You could use the stones to mark the solstices, just as you can at Stonehenge or Callanish. So that sense of ritual and seasonal change is available in a Glasgow housing estate, just as it is on Salisbury Plain. In other words, these stones aren't some bad cover version. They are the thing itself. And the stones did become meaningful for the people who lived near them. The story goes that when Margaret Thatcher was elected, she hated that public money had been used on this project, so she cut the funding before the finishing touches could be made, which meant that there was never any signage to explain and interpret the site. So as the years passed and new families moved into the area, it seems that the origin of the stones was forgotten and people began to believe that it really was an ancient site. So just to be clear, what Margaret Thatcher did there was she assisted in creating an aura of mystery and enchantment, which I don't imagine she would have been very pleased about. By the 2000s, when I visited, it was really overgrown and hidden with grass and bushes, like a proper kind of urban jungle. So people would go there and they'd drink and have a smoke and have little campfires. At least one family cherished it as a place to scatter the ashes of loved ones, and it was even used for pagan rituals. So this was a place that was on one level inauthentic, but it developed authenticity through the use and meaning that people put on it. Then in 2013, plans were announced by Glasgow City Council to redevelop the Sighthill estate, to knock down a lot of the old housing and build new. And that would mean that the circle would be destroyed. There was a public outcry at this news, and a campaign was launched by, among others, Stuart Braithwaite from the band Mogwai. He's the son of John Braithwaite, one of the designers of the circle, so it was personal to him, especially as his father had recently died at that time. Stuart said that he would chain himself to a bulldozer if he had to. But in the end, it didn't come to that. A compromise was reached. The stones were dug out of the ground, and the ground was landscaped, but the council agreed that the circle could be reconstructed using the original stones at a new location nearby, and that Duncan Lunan would be given the job of making sure that they were placed in alignment with the solstices and other astronomical events. So the circle now looks much as you see it in the picture here, really close to these apartment buildings, and right next actually to the M8 motorway. It's a 21st century structure based on a 21st century structure based on a 20th century structure based on a prehistoric idea. An archaeologist I spoke to said it has a really fascinating temporality, which is another way of saying it's really fucked up. To me, it feels almost like a monument to my dad. Stuart Braithwaite told me when I visited the site with him. He was obsessed with astronomy and Neolithic stones and community and all sorts of things that this place embodies. But even just as a Glaswegian, he said, I think it's great. Weird things like the standing stones give the city its soul. I find the idea fascinating that stone circles can have strong associations with or even embody certain individuals. And I think when you're writing a non-fiction book that involves travelling and meeting people, you're constantly opening yourself up to the possibility of sharing a moment of profundity, of intimacy, of glimpsing someone else's soul. And I experienced that at this place. It's a stone circle on a farm in Somerset, built quite recently for a man in his 40s who had suffered a tragic loss, the sort you think you're not going to be able to survive, you know? It's a ring of 8 stones, which range in height between 6 and 13 feet, with a further 4 lying in the centre, and a large flat stone that you can't quite see a little beyond the perimeter. We sat side by side on one of the stones in the middle, and I asked this man, whose name is Ben, what the circle is to him. And he told me that it's a place where he can come and reflect upon his daughter Iris. She had died 6 years before, at the age of 15, in an accident on the farm. The place it happened was actually the spot marked by the flat stone just outside the perimeter. The circle for him is a place of consolation. He's found it difficult to accept that she didn't have as long a life as she ought to have done. But the great age of the stones, because the stones themselves, of course, are very old, even though the circle isn't, the great age of the stones makes that injustice seem less. Because the difference between 15 years and 70 or 80 years feels insignificant when set against deep geological time. But the circle is also a place of ongoing connection. He feels that he finds Iris there. He feels a sense of powerful love. There's a kind of energy in the circle and the way it sits in the landscape, especially amid the colours of autumn, that expresses her. I remember at one point when we were sitting there, he took out his phone and he played me a clip that she had made of a starling murmuration, and we listened to her voice, utterly delighted and transported by the great flock of birds in the sky. And it struck me then that stone circles might somehow corral the energy of the dead, some trace of identity and spirit, like data on a phone. I'm not claiming that is the case. It does sound, as I see it now, like a fanciful notion, or a form of self-soothing. And perhaps it is that, perhaps it is just nonsense, perhaps it is a consoling fantasy. But sitting there and listening in the company of her father to a lost child's captured wonder, I could almost believe it. There's something about the shape and structure of these places, whether ancient or modern, that seems to speak to something deep within us. The ring embodies an idea of eternity, or a kind of data loop, and stone circles are enclosing places, but they're also open. They're open to the sky, and they're open in the spaces between the stones. So they seem to me to speak of both absence and presence, of holding on and letting go. And that's why for me they are ideal sites for remembrance, statements in the landscape expressive of both death and perhaps even more so of love. I'd like to end by circling back to the beginning. This picture was taken 2 months ago on the island of Islay. It's the same stone as in the first photograph I showed, the one I was sitting on top of in 1984. In August, I returned to the island for the first time in just over 40 years. I showed my old photo to an archaeologist called Stephen Mythen, and he knew straight away what the site was. He said, "Oh, that's Cragibus, wonderful place." And he explained that it was the remains of a Neolithic tomb, and he told me how to get to it. So I drove there, I climbed over a farm gate, I touched the stone. I didn't try to climb up on it this time. I'm not much taller now than I was by then. Taking this picture involved kind of propping up my phone on a fence post and setting the timer and running back to the stone, being careful not to slip on the abundant sheep muck that was all around. It was very strange to be there again. I felt connected to my childhood, but also cut off from it. In the same way, I suppose, that when we visit ancient structures, we may feel connected to the childhood of our species, but also very different from those humans who built and used them. I'm a really different person now from the little boy who sat on that stone, physically, psychologically, emotionally. But the stone itself is much the same. And I think that's part of the magic of these places too. Their eternal quality makes us feel our own transience more keenly. That was, as I said, a portal stone. It was part of the entrance to a tomb, to a place of the dead. But all such places, I think, can serve as gateways to a better understanding of ourselves as humans and as individuals in time. They may cause us to think about the path we've taken in our own lives or in our long human journey, and to hope that we haven't left it too late to turn, if we choose, in another direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I don't think there could be a more perfect way of putting together the reason why we started Stone Club in the first place, because I think whether considered naivety or optimism, we're really interested in looking all the way back to try and find these things. And I think a photograph like that as well, and the one that came at the beginning as a child, we were so moved by people getting in touch. We had lots. It used to happen a lot where people would get in touch and say, "Do you know what this site is?" And maybe we would, maybe we wouldn't, or maybe the community would. But there's something incredible about putting those photographs side by side, isn't there, in terms of what they mean?
Yeah.
Can you just talk about how this book came to be and where it came from? Because obviously all of your books are looking in some ways about permanence and impermanence and life and death as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a sort of unofficial trilogy, the book, the third book in an unofficial trilogy. My previous books are to do with churches and graveyards, and I think what they all have in common really is they're about the kind of marks we leave on the land, generally in stone, to ask the question, do we matter? And this one, I guess, just sort of naturally evolved out of the previous two. I never set out to write a trilogy, and in fact, I must be really stupid because it took me a very long time to work out that this ought to be the third book. But it really, the deeper roots of are in those sort of childhood experiences of kind of digging at sites, and also I think maybe little losses I've suffered in my own life, I think probably inform it as well, my kind of interest in these places. Yeah, and that's the kind of personal material that I won't go into tonight, but people can read that if they wish to.
Sighthill as well. I just wanted to come back to Sighthill as well, because the first time I visited Sighthill, I'd gone to see my friends David and Heather at Volcanic Tongue, this little record shop that was in Glasgow, and then we walked. I was walking with Richard Youngs, a musician from Glasgow, and Andrew Payne, or Paz, a musician from Glasgow, and we walked up to the Stone Circle, and David and Heather were like, "Oh, be careful! Three English guys walking that way, just like, and it was like two of them lived in Glasgow anyway, and it was fine. Of course, it was fine, but there's also this perception about walking through certain parts of the city. And then when we got there was some graffitied stones, and it was really used. It was like a lot of German dolmens or German sites where you see graffiti on sites, and they're used in the modern day. But at the same time, everyone we met obviously really, really loved it, and the motorway was right by it, right by it, going through, dissecting the city, dissecting the site, and it's so urban and so ancient feeling at the same time. It was incredible. I just wondered if you could talk a bit more about Sighthill and everything that you discovered through writing the book.
Yeah, I mean, Sighthill is an estate or a scheme. We call them schemes in Scotland, up in the north of the city, and they redeveloped it in the sort of like 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013 to make the place nicer for the Commonwealth Games coming to the city, apparently. But it's a wonderful community there, and I think it's interesting that a modern site like that did develop a kind of authenticity through use, really. I went there with a guy called Kenny Brophy, who's an archaeologist that calls himself the urban prehistorian. He's really interested in sites like that are either modern sites or they're kind of like ancient sites in a modern context. Like in the Scottish new town of Glenrothes, there's a Neolithic henge that is now part of a housing estate called the Henge, imaginatively. And that's really great, and kids play football around it and things, so I am quite interested in those juxtapositions.
I guess finally as well, as a question, well, if anyone's got any questions, put your hand up or give me a shout, but I think the other thing I'm really interested in is just your own journey to get to these places, at this point as well, because you've written about, tombs and graveyards, you've written about Britain, you've written about, and you travel and you go around and you see these things. It's experiential writing. This is not, it's not, it's academic because you're researching things as well, but you're going out there and you're doing it. Like the last time we was together was actually crawling through like Menontoll on, in West Penwith, and it was an incredibly drizzly day. It was, it's not depressing weather, but if you're not used to Cornwall, maybe it is because you're expecting the sort of Cornish Riviera. But you were really drawn to these places. I just wonder if you could talk about why you were drawn to them and why this book came along.
I mean, again, I think it's to do with. I think some people have an interest in the elegiac, really, a sense, a deep feeling for things that are past or passing. So that's just something within me, really. But also, I was looking at photographs. I finished writing this book in March, at the end of March of this year, and it came out in September. And I'm only just really beginning now to be able to catch my breath. And I was looking recently, while I was actually preparing slides for this talk, I was looking back at some photographs of places I went to, and I thought, God, that was a magical 2 years, getting to spend time in these places. I think part of the motivation, I think, was I thought it'd be good to spend a couple of years going around stone circles and not reading the news. Although, of course, these aren't. I think it's easy to fall into to be seduced by the idea that these are sort of sites of innocence, whereas in fact a stone circle is an oil rig in embryo, in a sense. Or kind of the way we begin to sort of change the earth, I feel really begins significantly in the Neolithic. So I think it's just some kind of, it's like that Welsh word kind of hiraeth, isn't it, where you've got sometimes translated as homesickness, but it's also a kind of yearning for a place you can never get to, and I think that I feel that very deeply, and I think probably that sort of feeling, although the book's full of humour and jokes, and there's loads of people being funny in it, but I think there's maybe that feeling of slight kind of melancholy yearning is probably deep within its DNA somewhere.
And did it change you? Did it change the way you look at these places through writing this book? From the moment you started writing the book and what you thought it was going to be about to the point where you're here now?
I don't think it changed me. I think I found myself, I encountered myself in these places. Whatever is in me found a kind of answer, or an echo in these stones, probably.
I think that's kind of what it's all about. Peter Ross, thank you so much. It's great to have you here. It really is an incredible book. So books at the back. Lally will be there with the Stone Club zines that we just made, and Peter will be there, and everyone that's written things will be there. And I'm going to try and find Zip Zap Zoom so you can hear what Sean Ryder talking about UFOs when he was 15, but then couldn't remember doing. Sounds like, so I'll put that on as everyone goes to the back. But thanks for coming. We'll definitely be back. I'm not sure when we're back. We haven't got another date for next year yet, but we'll be back at some point soon, and celebrate Samhain and the winter solstice in your last drinks and time together this evening. Thanks as always for coming. It's been 4 years now we've been doing this here, and it means a lot to us, so thanks for being here, and have a wonderful onward evening. Thank you.